a new year. Another turn of the calendar, another round of fireworks and resolutions. But before we rush into what's next, let's pause. Scripture says, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." Not to count the days gone by, but to make the days ahead count. Every sunrise is mercy renewed. Every breath is grace extended. And as the clock strikes midnight, we're reminded time isn't ours to keep, it's God's to redeem. The Bible reminds us, if anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. The old has gone, the new has come. So this year, let's not just turn a page. Let's turn our hearts. Let's walk into the unknown with faith, trusting the author who's already written every day.
Well, good morning again to everyone, and Happy New Year. We're waking up a little bit still. I know it's a little bit cold this morning, but this morning we're going to hear from our guest preacher. This is Hank Lunsford, and Hank is a certified lay servant minister here in the United Methodist Church and blessed here at First Church, Port Orange. As we are continuing in this series of God who calls us into a new way of living all the time, we're looking at all these stories of Jesus at the beginning of his ministry. And today we saw the scripture of Jesus proclaiming what God had anointed him through the prophet Isaiah and others to be as the Messiah. But if you notice there, he went back to his home church. That's the beauty of going back to Nazareth. He went back to the church he grew up with. And it was called a synagogue. Yes, he was a Jewish boy, but there's something about what happens when we raise ourselves up in the local church. And the lay servant ministry is a ministry that's provided by the United Methodist denomination. It's through a board of discipleship. But it's a means for us in the church to go through specific training to kind of grow deeper in some of the ways that we can be equipped and trained to understand the scriptures and how we might be able to serve in ministry. All of this is to point to how we might be able to serve in ministry. Expanding the ministry of the church through all of those who are trained up within it. In a sense, when Jesus went back to his home church, he said, this not only is what I am now receiving and proclaiming as Messiah, but what I will be bringing to the church, that my people become the church, the work of God in this world. And so Hank has been certified and has been taking classes and leading classes throughout the many years. He's going to share a little bit about some classes we have coming up here, but also just what lay servant ministry can mean for you and your own growth and what it means for us in the church here. So Hank, thank you so much for being willing to share this morning. Let's give him a round of applause and a warm welcome.
I want to read the official definition of a certified lay servant. A trained professing member of a church called to serve beyond the typical roles, offering leadership, teaching, facilitating worship, and providing pastoral care, essentially extending ministry through trained volunteers of the local church and community. Now, please don't panic. We're not going to ask you to preach a sermon every Sunday. That's not what lay servant is about. It's about knowing as much as we can about how Jesus led us to the point we are in our life and where he's leading us to in the future. I never really thought much about it until I took a couple of the classes, basic class, which sounds really boring, basic, but there's so much that you learn in the basic course. Why do we have candles up here? That's part of it. What is the order in which we have our church service? That's part of the basic course. We learn some of the things that we've just taken for granted. Oh, that's why we do that. And it gets to be, that got my interest. But when you see the name basic course, it just doesn't sound very exciting. And so Pastor Tony and I talked and prayed about this. And so our first class is going to be called Come to the Table. This is all about communion. And with Easter coming up and the really important significance of Easter and having communion, we felt like this would be a good way to get your feet wet. And so we're going to have these classes here at the church. But let me tell you a couple of ways that lay servant has shaped my life. I actually took my first class more than 15 years ago, so I've been doing it for a while. I had an interesting experience when I went to Ukraine. The pastor of the church over there said the one thing he needed was money. And I thought, no, that's the Baptist church. I'm looking for the Methodist church. And he said, okay, what we really need to know is how to speak English. Now, this was 10 years ago. The unemployment rate was close to 90% because Russia had pulled out. All of the factories and everything that had been Russian were gone. Most of the Russian military equipment had been made at that time in Ukraine. So, poof, they were out of work. Empty factories. People came from other countries and tried to get the factory going. Big problem was language. They couldn't speak English. So, as an English teacher, I felt God calling me to go, and that was a way I could go and to serve. But when I got there, it became apparent it had been illegal to be a Christian for 50, 60 years. And so the people coming to the church were new to Christianity. They were new to the Methodist church. And some people came just because it was a free English class. And so each time I was there, I had close to 50 students. I divided them in half, those with no English, some with some English. First group came for an hour and a half, second group for an hour and a half. First group came and so did the second group and stood in the hallway and listened in. When the first group went home, or supposed to go home, they went in the hallway and listened to the second group. So I finally just put them all in the same room. We were piled in there. And it was cold because there was no heating. And this was the middle of the winter. But some of the things that happened in that class were just amazing to me. You see, they had never heard of a benediction. We do that all the time. One of the things Pastor Tony does, if you haven't noticed, when we close our service as he leaves, he gives the benediction from Numbers 6:24. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Now, I read that to them, and a couple of them helped translating. What just amazed me the next morning, all 50 had memorized that. They came in, and they were so dedicated to that. We also, a few times later, learned to sing a song that we just think of as normal. Blessed be the time. If you know the story of that, it's even more interesting. There was a church in England doing fine. One day the pastor looked out, there were 3 people in the back. This is a very common little church, just workers. 3 people in the back had on these expensive outfits. And after the church, they came to him and said, hey, we want you to go out in the woods, out in the nowhere. There's a church, there's a parsonage, no pastor, and no church members. And so he went out. The first Sunday, nobody came. Second Sunday, a few came. Well, by the time a year went by, the church was packed. And one Sunday, he stood and he looked in the back of the church. Here are these 3 men. And he thought, well, great, they came to give us an offering or something. After the church was over, they came to him and they said, John, we need you at another church. You need to leave here and go there. So John announced to his congregation the next Sunday that he was leaving. And he asked them, when you come next Sunday, it'll be my last Sunday, so please come prepared to help us pack up everything and put it on a wagon and go back to London. The next Sunday they did that, and they got it packed. And just as they got it all packed, John said to them, stop. unpack it. I can't leave here. These are my people. I have to stay here. Blessed be the tie that brought us together. And he wrote that as a poem and later as a song. Now, I learned that in my basics. And what I learned from that was you can go and be a part of a church and not realize what an impact you are. And so that's what lay disciple is about, is knowing more and more about Jesus Christ, how he is with us, how he is taking care of us even when we don't think so. It took me a long time, most of my life, to understand God works on his time. I just wanted it now. I mean, I don't have time to wait around. Let's get this done. But it doesn't always work that way. During the Christmas season, when I was in Ukraine, it was unusual. People in Ukraine at that time, I can't tell you about today, but back then, would never look you in the face, because if you did, that came from the communist period, where if they were looking at you, they were spying on you. So they would always look down and walk around and just look at the sidewalk in front of them. Nobody spoke. So after a few times of trying to say good morning in my lousy Ukrainian, I finally just gave up. But Easter Sunday, I decided to go to the bakery and get some stuff for the family I was staying with. And on the way over, people would look at me and they would say, as I learned in Ukrainian, "He has risen." And I thought, what in the world? Nobody would talk to me a week ago. Then I realized I had a tie with a Bible on it. And the proper response was, "He truly has." So I had to go back to the house quick and learn. But I learned from that, from the basic course that I took, that people are looking for guidance. They're looking for encouragement. And how simple is that? So it was a real opening for me. Over the years, I belonged to a group called Team Rubicon. You could simply describe us as kind of like second and third responders. We go into any situation. Hurricanes, we go in a couple of days ahead. And as soon as it's safe to get outside, we clear the streets. We saw the trees down and get the roads open. Then we board up houses and put tarp on it. And then our final thing is to get the bottom layer of the inside of the house out of there so that the mold doesn't keep growing. But this group is made up of about 80% veterans. Now, they weren't in the military when I was, which is probably good, because when I was in the cavalry, we were still riding horses. But they were over in the Mideast, and they're not condemned to a hospital or having to go for major treatment, but they have minor cases of PTSD. And if you haven't been in the military, you may not understand. The military is a totally different culture. It's a culture all of its own. And when one day you go from that culture, poof, into another culture, it's like me going down the street in Ukraine and everybody's talking to me one day. And so what I found out was in the evenings as we sat around, the fact that I was also a veteran, the fact that I was a little bit older, actually a lot older than most of them, and they would start asking me questions. Do you go to church? Or I would ask him, do you go to church? Something that I learned at my basic training from lay servant ministries. There were simple things, but I had learned that. And I talked with them. And I still keep in touch with 3 or 4 of them that still go to church regularly. But I had so many that God put me in the right place. God had given me the opportunity to be a lay servant. And that's what it was about. It wasn't about getting up and preaching in front of the crowd. It was about knowing what to say and how to say it to other people. when I was in Sarasota for many years, I had a man come up to me and he said, "Where do you go to church?" I said, "Well, I go over to Braid River Methodist." He says, "Well, we got a better one over here." I said, "Okay." Then a few weeks later, he came in and says, "You know, you're younger than me." Well, he was 90, so yeah, I was younger than him. And he said, "You know, I need you to help me. I get around a little bit." He said, "Just go to some of the rooms and tell the nurses that you're part of the chaplain's group, and they'll call and you can go pray with them." Well, fortunately, in the lay disciple program, we have a couple of really good classes. One is on personal prayer, one is on small group prayer, and there's a large group prayer, corporate prayer. And so I was able to do that because I had learned from my lay disciple classes. I didn't know that's why God had been going to those classes. It's just one of those things that came along, and there it was. There was a reason that I was going to those classes. A few years later, I was in Alabama, and I don't remember if I gave you the slide for the roof of the house, but Methodist group was up in Alabama. That's the next one. That's okay. That's okay. There it is. There it is. I don't know that you can see that, but up on the roof, it says, "Stop looking, start helping." And the little boy, you can't even see him up there, but he's up there. He's a little tiny speck up in the top corner. But each evening, we went back, we were a Methodist. Something happened like it does all the time here. When you go to a small group or you go to an organization and they turn to you and they say, "Would you open us with prayer?" What do you mean? Or they say, "Who would like to open in prayer?" What does everybody do? Mm-hmm. Well, I learned not to do that because I took the small group and I took the medium group and I took the big group, but I don't do the big. Well, I guess I do the big group. Here I am. I forgot I was in a big group. That's how well the class taught me. But we saw this, and that's kind of what I'm trying to say to you here. Is don't look, help. Take one of these classes. Take the first class that we're going to be offering in February and find out what it's about. You just might like it. It's going to be come to the table, which, as I said, is part of communion. So why do we have bread? Why are they drinking wine? What's the background of that? You know, sometimes we do things just because we've always done it, and that's the way we do it. Just a week ago, I had a good Methodist say to me, "What's the deal with intinction? What is it and why are we doing it?" Well, intinction definition, according to Dr. Google, is taking something together. So as we do intinctions, we're taking the bread, dipping it in the grape juice, and we're taking it as one item. When a friend of mine died that belonged to the Byzantine Catholic Church, which you probably never heard of, the Byzantines are one of the smallest of the Catholic groups. I won't go back to another funeral. It was 3.5 hours long. But when they had communion, I did the unthinkable. I got in line, and it was supposed to be just for people in their church. And the way they administer communion, the priest takes a silver spoon, puts a piece of bread on it, puts it in your mouth, then he pours some wine in the spoon, puts it in your mouth, then he wipes the spoon, and you have had communion. You're not allowed to touch it. I learned that in the class, come to the table. I also learned in the class that we as Methodists, it's an open table. You hear Pastor Tony say that frequently. Everybody is welcome. Men, women, children. At the Last Supper, who was there? 12 disciples. Even the bad guy. Judas was there for communion. We allow anyone to come to communion because we are Methodist. And that's a part of what we learned in the class called My Methodist Beliefs, as well as the class on Come to the Table. We're going to have our class February 20 and 21st, and this will be in the bulletin. It will also be in, it's on the table out front. I left some brochures there. If you're interested, please sign up. You'll see my phone number on it if you want to call and ask me any questions about it. And I have a 941 area code, so don't be surprised. It's Sarasota. But I'll be glad to call you and talk to you and give you more details of what all of this is about. Some of the classes I've taken have been really interesting. There is a class called Pew to Pulpit. And I guess that's why I'm up here. I felt comfortable coming up here because I took that class. All of the classes are 10 hours. So you're going to get a really good small group class. But this class was in Anthony. Does anybody know where Anthony is? Yeah, it's Florida. It's over north of Ocala. And to get to the church, you go up Highway 441, you turn onto a state road, onto a county road, onto a dirt road. And as I'm zipping down the dirt road going, wrong, the road dead-ended. And over to my left was a little church. First Methodist Church of Anthony. And it got even more interesting because the pastor who was teaching was an AME pastor. And if you haven't been to a black church and listened to a sermon, you haven't had a real sermon. And he taught that class, and he had us jumping and going. But I walked out of there with no fear. And my homily, which I had to do for the end of it, was called from pew, don't be a pew potato. And I'm asking you not to be a pew potato. This is your chance to go and have class and to learn something that you never know. Someone may walk up to you as they did to me at the hospital, Chinese lady. Who, Jesus? Oh, I was ready for that. I had the Disciples' Creed. I believe in God the Father. Chinese, no English, Chinese. I didn't panic. I went and I got a Bible in Chinese and a Bible in English. About 3 months later, she came up to me in the hallway again, and I'm cringing. What's she going to ask this time? And she said in perfect English, I love Jesus. Simple things that you can do in your life. You don't have to stand on the street corner. Bless him for doing it, but stand on the street corner. Jesus saves. But there are quiet ways that you can become a better Christian and a disciple. You don't have to be a disciple and wear a long gown and stand in front of the synagogue. That was Jesus' job. He set the example for us. And so here is our example of what we can do. So we're going to have, actually, one of the other places I like going to these little country places. You can take the courses anywhere in Florida. Every district has them. And we had one over in a town called Pine Level. Anybody ever heard of Pine Level? It's here. It's on the other side of Arcadia. And just so you know, the politicians haven't changed much. Back a couple of 100 years ago, 150 years ago, the politicians decided to divide Manatee County into 3 counties. And they created DeSoto County. and they said, that's the county seat. Well, there was nothing there. So they went out and they built a courthouse. Well, people came to town on the weekends, especially the cowboys. And within a couple of months, there was a courthouse, a school, and 17 bars. And into town one day rode a man in one of the old-fashioned wagons with mules, and it was called the Gospel Wagon. He was a Methodist minister. And after a little while, they finally built a church. That church is still there. It is the oldest continuously used Methodist church in Florida. And there it is. Now, that's the third addition to the church. Up inside was about the size of the choir loft. And that's what they did when they got too big. They took the church and made it into the choir loft, and they added on just like to here, and then they went and added on to what it is today. But going to class there, that was the most fascinating thing, because these are some real, true native Floridians. And they believe baptizing in the stream, in the creek. They just had some wonderful ideas. I love going to these classes with them. So, following along those lines, next Saturday, I'm going to be up in Anthony. Anthony's up north of Ocala. And they're going to have a 10-hour class. So we're going to start at 8 and go till 6 in the evening. But I can't wait to get there because of the people that you meet in the small group. And if you've ever been in a small group, you know what it's like. You get to meet people you never knew before. You get to learn other people's thoughts. You can become a lay disciple. You take your advanced course. We're doing it backwards. We're taking the advanced course. Then we will have the basic course coming up. And the basic courses are coming up in March 20 and 21st. And boy, we had some high-powered, top-notch, absolute, wonderful instructors. Not me. We have Pastor Tony, and we have Pastor John will be teaching the classes. And one class will be the basic, and the other class will be an advanced class. So you have a chance. Now, going along that, especially for those of you that are at home and watching, there are classes on Zoom coming up. The Southwest District has where they go 5 days, 2 hours each, and you have completed the class. I didn't mention about a final exam. There isn't one. There's no test, no anxiety. Now, pew to pulpit, you do have to do a homily, and that's 5 minutes. So you can, if you want to do that, fine. But don't panic over having to take it. But the Zoom classes are coming up, one starting in a week, but they have a basic class. The cost of that is $5 plus the book. And we are having the one called Holy Mystery, United Methodist Understanding. And I have some of these flyers on the table as you go out on the left-hand side. If you're interested in the class, pick one of these up. And at the bottom is my phone number. And I'll be glad to talk to you about that or any of the classes. There are actually, there's a list of part of them out there. There's more than 80 of these classes available. So if you look and you see something on there you really like, let Pastor Tony or I know. And we'll see if we can't get a group of 5 or 10 people together and we'll have a class. I can't tell you how impressed I was when I left Ukraine. I went into a group of people that had never really had worship. Out of the 45 people, only about 10 of them were Christian. By the time we left, almost all had joined the church there. I didn't know that's what God had in mind for me. But taking these lay servant classes put me in the position that he wanted me to be in. I just didn't know it. And I still think each time I hear Pastor Tony with the benediction, and especially when I hear the hymn, which we're going to sing now, Blessed Be the Tie, it reminds me of how God put me in a position without telling me, didn't ask my permission. He just somehow piqued my interest, and I became part of it.